to our second installment of the Community Support Grant workshops. Today we're talking about project eligibility and application content. So we're so excited that you guys are here. My name is Amara Faring. I am the Community Development and Arts Learning Specialist for the Wyoming Arts Council. Part of my job is to manage the process of the Community Support Grant. So I talk a lot about the content portion of this grant. And then we also on the call with us today have Kashmir Baland, who is our Grants and Administration Manager. She is the one who did our workshop last Thursday, which you can find on YouTube. We've got a link to it. She's super helpful with the nuts and bolts of things, the UEI, all of that good stuff. So if you have questions about that, she is here today. And then we also have our Assistant Director, Rachel Clifton, with us to also help answer some questions. She will also be managing the chat. So if there are questions that come up for you that you'd rather just put in the chat instead of raise your hand and ask, please feel free to do that. And we will get to those questions and answer everything you got. So we are excited you guys are here. So let's talk about the Community Support Grant and what it is. So the Community Support Grant offers operating and project support and arts learning support for organizations that provide services to their community through the arts. So there's some things that you should note about this grant. So grant funding is available for programs and services between July 1st of 2023, so this coming July, and June 30th of 2024. So we can't fund anything outside of that window. So those are dates that you should know. An organization is eligible to receive up to $10,000 in operating and project support and up to $5,000 in arts learning support for a total of $15,000 in grant funding. So that's pretty exciting. The third thing you should note is the amount of funding that you can request for this grant cannot exceed 50% of your total project and operating expenses and requires a 1-1 match. So we'll kind of get into a little bit more of that later to kind of just really walk through what that looks like and how you can actually meet your match, some ideas to do that. The other thing you should note is if you are going to apply for this grant, the deadline to apply is April 14th. At 11:59 p.m., baby. So you got some time throughout that day to finish up if you need to. Kashmir and I will also be available until 5 p.m. that day to answer any questions that you have. We are also obviously available Monday through Friday to answer questions as you're going through this, but just wanted to let you know on that specific day, we will be here till 5. So let's talk a little bit about who is eligible for this funding. So CSG is for those who work or volunteer for nonprofit art organizations, educational institutions, community clubs, local government units and departments that offer arts programming. So you'll notice the arts programming in there is bolded because that's what we're funding, is that. So we welcome applications from various eligible organizations. So first-time applicants, totally come on in. Returning applicants, so if this is something that you need yearly, you can come back and apply for this funding every year. This is an annual grant. You must be a 501c3 nonprofit or a government agency to be eligible for this funding, but do not worry. If your organization does not meet these eligibility requirements, you may still be able to apply using a fiscal sponsor. So if you have questions about that, we are happy to answer those, but that is an option for you for sure. So we also have organizations that serve all sizes of communities, which is really cool. Wyoming is a a big town with long streets, basically. But we do have lots of rural organizations, people who are in urban areas that apply with small, medium, and large operating budgets. So all across the spectrum, we get applicants. The other thing you should note is that applicants must be a Wyoming-based organization or an organization on a bordering state that primarily serves Wyoming citizens. So an example of that is the Montana Shakespeare Company actually applies for this grant to help them with their Wyoming tour. So that's a good example of what that can look like. Just one more reminder that you must have your UEI to receive this funding. If you do not have it yet, you can go to sam.gov and start learning about it. Once again, Kashmir's a great resource to help you kind of understand what is needed for your UEI. So feel free to reach out to her for that. So are there any questions so far kind of about the nuts and bolts of CSG before we kind of get into more of the content base? No, nothing so far. Great. All right. Well, we'll just keep on trucking then. So we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. I mentioned this because CSG is for Operation Project and Arts Learning Support, but those are the 3 areas that we are looking at. So let's talk a little bit about Operation Support. So Operation Support is to help organizations sustain and expand their programs and services. So we really do want to help you become a sustainable organization. And some of the things that you can apply for general operating support include salaries, marketing, rent, utilities, insurance, your supplies can be in there, exhibits, artistic fees, all of that can be included in your operation support, which is pretty cool. So then let's break down projects a little bit. So we fund a bunch of art projects in a lot of different disciplines. So it doesn't have to be one specific discipline. We've got lots of things. I've got a little list up here of stuff we've seen. So arts education, of course, dance, design. So that can be, graphic design. It can be a bunch of different things, film, folk and traditional arts. So we've got a great list up there of projects that we've seen in different genres of arts. Projects can be small. They can be medium. They can be large. We don't care. We love to see them all. So whatever kind of size project you've got, bring it on in. We've also funded existing projects, so projects that have been going on for a while, and then new projects as well. So that's pretty cool. But once again, I will reiterate that they must take place in Wyoming and between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th of 2024. So if your project starts in June, we can't fund the June part. We can fund the July part though. So just make sure that you think about those things as you're applying for this grant. So sometimes projects consist of one or more specific events or activities, and it may be a new initiative that you have, or it can be a part of your organization's regular season of activities. So got a broad spectrum there for you as well. They can be short-term projects, long-term projects. The other thing that you can think about is that you can identify certain components of your projects and you can apply for those specific things too. So it doesn't have to be your overall project. If you've got just one thing that's arts related that you need funded, you can definitely write about that and apply for funding for that specific thing. So you can apply for any and all phases of your project from the start, so you're planning through the implementation. So be thinking about some of those long-term goals too as you're applying for this, and especially since this is an annual grant, definitely things that you can continue coming back for, which is pretty cool. Are there any questions about projects? No? If something comes up for you. Oh, Rachel.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. I know your last bullet point down there on the bottom, a project should not encompass an organization's activities or costs in a year. But to clarify, you can apply for multiple projects in your application. So as long as everything's happening within that date range that Amara keeps talking about, it doesn't have to just be one singular project you're requesting funding for. It can be a few.
Yes. Yeah. So multiple projects. So if you've got multiple things happening, yes, absolutely put that in your application. Thank you for that clarification, Rachel. That was awesome. Okay, so let's talk about arts learning. So arts learning is a really cool part of this because sometimes people don't realize that some of their programming is actually arts learning based. And so we just want to make sure that we kind of talk about how you should be thinking about arts learning if you're thinking about applying. So funding is available for projects that enliven or improve arts learning to increase knowledge, understanding of, and skills in one or more art forms. So your arts education programming should be designed for a specific arts learning goal, and there should be evaluation methods that are attached to that are designed to kind of measure that goal. So it should all be growth and learning focused. So if you're thinking about K through 12, you should include a focus on education standards, which you can find on the Wyoming education website. Just because that's what they're doing in school, having that extra focus there is really great. The panelists love to see that. So think about doing that. If you're doing arts learning outside of K through 12, your learning should be your main focus, your main purpose for that, not a secondary outcome. And what we mean by that is, for example, say you're going to do like a literary festival and you're bringing in a keynote speaker. Having the speaker speak, to your audience is not arts learning. Technically, it's more of a secondary outcome because people are going to get lots of different things from that. But if you are bringing in your speaker and he is also, or they are also doing a workshop for writers, that would be arts learning because your main purpose there is to teach writers a new skill. So that is the main purpose, not a secondary outcome. So funding is available for nonprofits, social service agencies, tribes, community centers, school district libraries, local art agencies, lots of groups there. Just once again, make sure you have a 501c3 or you are a local government. And if not, fiscal sponsor, baby. So just remember that that is a possibility for you. Any questions on arts learning so far? Cool. Thanks, Rachel. All right, so let's talk about the evaluation process and kind of how this works. So once you submit your application, Kashmir and I will do a quick staff review just to make sure that everything looks good. We're not really going through like the panel will. We're just checking your UEI. We're checking all of your eligibility. We're looking at your budget to make sure you're doing the 50% match, all of that good stuff. And then once we do that, then it will go to the panel. And the panel consists of community members, artists, arts administrators, educators, and other individuals with expertise in these fields. So we've got a great panel of people who will then look at your grant application, and they will be scoring these individually. So they're not working as a group. They're looking at them individually, reading through them, giving you feedback, scoring you on a scale of 1 to 10. And then after they do their review, then we will have a panel meeting in May, on May 15th, where the panel will come together virtually and kind of talk about all of their findings, what they saw, things to make better, and they will make a recommendation to our board. Now, one thing to note about this panel meeting is you can call and listen in to the panel's conversation. This is not the meeting where you can make any commentary, though. This is purely just for you to listen, learn, kind of get an idea of where maybe your grant is, all of that good stuff. And so then once that panel meeting is over and they make a recommendation for our board, we will have a board meeting in May, which dates to be determined. So be looking for those dates, but the board will actually then go through the grants, look at the recommendation, and you actually can call into that meeting and make any commentary about your grant to the board or talk to the board about your grant. So that is a time for you to actually talk to us and let us know your thoughts. So just keep that in mind. So that's kind of how this process works. The panel has about a month to review all of the applications that they will be reviewing. So just kind of note that timeline in there. One thing to point out is we do have the evaluation criteria on the Arts Council website. and they are within the grant application there. So just know that you can go on the website, or when you start filling out the application, you'll be able to see the criteria that the panel is ranking you on. So I did see a question pop up. What do we got, Rachel?
Yep. So Andrew in the chat asks, are you able to make changes to your application after the panel meeting to align more with their comments?
Oh, good call. So no, you are not able to go back into your application and make adjustments, but that is what you can call into the board for. So we've had people in the past call in and say like, hey, I listened to the panel meeting, I saw some of their comments and suggestions, and here's how we would like to address that, through our application and how we're going forward. So that is the time for you to talk to our board about like, hey, I did hear this and here's how we want to fix it. So you can't go back in and write it, but you can tell us. So it's a great place to do that. Are there any other questions about that? About the process at all? Great. All right. Let's talk about some content. So the panel has given us some really great feedback, and I kind of just want to talk to you all about kind of what the panel is looking for in a couple of these areas. So one of the things you'll talk about is community. So community has a couple different things that the panel looks for. So they look for two things really. Who is your programming for and who participates in it? And then also they want to know the bigger picture as well. So they want to know about your community demographics, your location, your economics. What does your city location look like? So they're kind of trying to get a nice picture of where you are and who you're serving. And that will help you identify the needs of your community. And it will also help you answer how your organization or project is reaching the community and enhances the community involvement. So by doing those things, you're able to kind of make a lovely little package of understanding for our panelists, which is great. The other thing that you will be asked in the community portion is how does your organization invite, engage, or create alongside non-dominant communities? This is a big one for the panel because they're looking for how you are talking to your whole community. How do you bring people in? How are you inclusive to them? So some non-dominant communities are people with disabilities, older adults, veterans, low-income communities. So they're really looking for, and you can include all of that too in talking about who is in your community as well, but they're really wanting to know, how do you reach out to these people? Do you have partnerships with certain organizations that also serve these communities? Are you marketing to them specifically? Are you making phone calls? What are you doing to kind of bring them into your project or organization? They'll also ask you how you address requests for accommodation. So like say you're an orchestra and you have somebody coming that is hearing impaired and would like accommodation. So how do you address that? How do you work with them to get them what they need? If you need resources for this, we've got a couple. So our colleague, Josh Chrysler, is actually our accessibility coordinator on the Arts Council. He's a great resource for you to reach out to and kind of just talk about like, hey, like, can we talk about like what plan is or how I create one or whatever that looks like, or how do we do accommodations, all that good stuff. Josh can help you. We also have an ADA and accessibility checklist on our website that you can take yourself and your organization through to just kind of see where you are. So those are a couple really great resources that we have to kind of help you figure out where you are and what you're doing. Are there any questions about community? I saw that Rachel put in Josh's contact information in the chat there, and also our compliance and ADA stuff. So those are great resources. Once again, if you are looking through them after this and you need some assistance, feel free to reach out to any of us who are on this call or to Josh. We're happy to help you. So let's talk about the evaluation section of the application. So when the panel is looking at this, they're really looking for a couple different things here as well. So they're really looking for concrete methods and processes for how your organizations are receiving feedback, and also you plan to use that feedback. So, you know, we've had applicants in the past say like, hey, we just kind of have passerby conversations with people and that's how we get our feedback, which is great, but it's not super robust. So they're like, yes, have conversations with people, but how are you tracking those conversations? How do you use those conversations? So that's more of like the qualitative portion of the evaluation. Like, yeah, what conversations are you having? Are you getting feedback when you're walking through the crowd? Is it people stopping you? Is it like, what are all these things? That's great. How are you tracking that? And then also talking about more of the quantitative stuff, which is like the head counts, right? Of like, hey, we got 25 people in this workshop. That's awesome. Your ticket sales, sending out evaluations, surveys, social media polls, anything like that. So kind of tracking both of those things, how you're then going to use all of that feedback moving forward and improving your programs and organizations. So that's kind of an interesting one that we see is not a lot of people do both. So that's a great tip into really getting that evaluation section nailed down. So let's talk about the budget a little bit. So our budget has really been simplified a lot. So we need certain things from you, but we don't need like your entire operation budget. So we need you to provide how much your programs and services cost, which is going to be your expenses. We need you to provide how much grant funding you're requesting, which once again, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second, but once again, your grant funding can only be half or 50% of your total expenses. So that's the other thing you're going to have to provide to us, and then provide how much in-kind contributions. So donations of goods instead of cash you expect to receive. So those are kind of the three major things that we're asking you for. But let's talk a little bit about that cash match there that we've mentioned. So the match, the easy way to do this is if you take your expenses that we're asking you for and you cut them in half, like you divide them by 2, that's how much grant funding you can request. So that will be your 50%. And so then the other 50% of that is you as the organization will need to find other sources of income to meet that other half. So examples of meeting that other half can be your ticket sales, your memberships, other non-federal grants. So you can't match our grant with federal grants, with other federal grants, but you can with non-federal grants. Donations, fundraising. That's kind of like a general list of things that you can use to meet that other 50%. And it is a 50% match for both operating project support and arts learning. And once again, the budget is only specific to what an organization is requesting within the grant application. So once again, we don't need your full operating budget for the year. We just need the part that you are applying for. So are there any questions about the budget portion or the match? Do we have any questions generally that have come up? Not yet? Okay, great. Well, if they do, once again, feel free to put them in the chat and we will answer them, or raise your hand and we will get to you and answer your question for sure. So that's kind of like the bulk of the grant content there. So some grant writing tips as you're going into this. So some common mistakes that we see is completeness. So sometimes like answers just aren't quite as complete as they need to be. So make sure that everything is filled out. Sometimes you might miss a section. Casimir does a great job in our last grant workshop talking about like, hey, if you are going to apply for arts learning, make sure you click the button for arts learning in the application. So that way those questions will come up for you. So just double checking those types of things. Remember that your start date, so the project start date cannot be before we actually have the July 1st start. So just remember those things. We often see lack of specifics. So lack of the artists you're planning to hire, dates that you're planning to do these things, times, all of that stuff. So the specifics there. Also, if you're hiring artists, sometimes people forget to put in their qualifications, so their resumes or their biomaterials, materials in the narrative. So just remember to do that and be prepared for those things. And then sometimes we see the operation project narrative doesn't always reconcile with the budget that you've put in. So just kind of make sure that there's that consistency in there. Some helpful reminders for you as far as grant writing tips go. So write clearly, use simple, direct language, and be specific. So we want you to provide as much detail as you can and also use the full word count. So we don't need anything super flowery. We don't need anything super like, hey, my project is so great. We know your project's great. You're doing great work. But for our panel, very specific, simple, direct language is really helpful for them, and also providing detail. One of the biggest things that the panel said last year was they wish people would use the full word count that they have. So just remember to aim to use that full word count in all of those narratives. Remember to include the who, what, where, when, and why. So if you feel like maybe you haven't answered that specifically, remember to just walk yourself through all of those. Did I mention the who? Did I mention the what, the where, the when, and the why? Those are really helpful. And including start dates, the artists involved, their qualifications, all of that stuff, very important to include. Once again, double check that your questions are being answered fully. So when you're in the actual application and you're going through and you're doing your stuff, you will be answering questions in there. And just make sure that you're answering those questions to your fullest ability. That was another thing that the panel said last year, is they just felt like people generally were not fulfilling the questions. So make sure, just go back, read through, and if you feel like, yeah, I answered it, that's great. But just double check yourself. Include how the grant will be paying for arts-related expenses. That's another one. How this grant will make the project grow, be more accessible. The other thing that is really helpful is making sure that you check the grant guidelines and our eligibility requirements on the website, which is under the grant section. That will give you a great idea of like what you can and can't apply for, if you are eligible, what the fiscal sponsor stuff looks like, what you'll need from your fiscal sponsor. So make sure you double check all of that as well. And then the best grant applications are for projects that are planned well, with clear timelines, objectives, and outcomes. So, just make sure you're kind of hitting on all of those things and that you're being just very direct and detailed about that. I see that Denise has raised her hand. Denise, tell us all the things. What are your questions? Oh, I got to open the queue. Oh, okay. How do I do this? I've never done what?
I was going to say, she also dropped it in the chat.
Okay, great.
I think you're unmuted.
I don't know how to do this.
Hi, Amara. It's
Hey,
Denise.
Denise,
Yeah,
how
I just
are
went
you?
ahead and put it in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, what is the question, Rachel?
It is, will expenses for board professional development qualify?
Oh, yes. And Rachel, you may have to help me clarify this one a little bit, but sometimes people put that in the arts learning section. And sometimes people put it in their operating and project support. But yes, you can apply for professional development. That does count for sure. Does that answer your question, Denise?
Yes, if I need to elaborate, I assume I can give somebody a call and describe what specifics are on my mind. Say if a board member wants to take a trip to discover more about artist residencies or what have you, or
Yeah, for sure.
do something related to the arts that their organization is involved in.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
not a
And you
lot
would
of
give me a
money.
call, and we can definitely talk through what that looks like if you want to talk more in depth. But yeah, give me a call and we can talk about it. But yes, professional development is definitely well within this grant. So yes,
Okay.
I see that Rebecca has raised her hand. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, can you hear
Hey,
me?
what's up? I can hear you.
Good. Okay, so I just have a quick question. If you answered this, I had to come in late. So if
Oh,
you
no
answered
problem.
it, just tell me to watch the recording. So I know that traditionally the arts learning panel and the community support grant panel have been separate. And so for me, having served on one of those, I always knew that they weren't the same people reading the same questions. How do we get enough information in each question to make sure that everybody that's reading it gets the same information?
Sure. So that's a really good question. So you're talking about word count, which I know that, right? Like, how do I
Well,
put enough
mostly
in there,
like-
or like,
so our community served, is the arts learning panel gonna know what our community served is? Like that type of thing?
oh yeah. So like, are you saying like, are they able to see all of the different
Yeah.
questions? Yes, they are. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So your full application will go to the panelists and they'll read through it
Okay.
all. Yep.
Okay.
Good
Regardless of our-
question.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, so just to clarify, we did used to have separate operating project support panel and a separate arts learning panel. That is no longer how we're structured.
Okay.
So, yep, so panelists will read your entire application from start to finish.
So
Yep.
each question can just be fresh information.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. Good question. Are there any other questions? Got some resources here that you can find on our website, but of course, and they're also in the chat because lovely Rachel has put them in there. Are there any other questions that have popped up for you as we've gone through this? Once again, you can feel free to reach out to me for any content questions that you have. Phone, email, you can text my work phone, we can set up a virtual meeting, meet in person, whatever that looks like. Kashmir, you can reach out to her if you're having issues with Foundant or you need more information about your UEI or anything Foundant related. And Rachel, of course, is always a great resource because she knows it all. So
We did, it looks like, thank you for that.
Yes.
We did have another question from Quinn in the chat.
Oh, sure.
And she says, for orgs applying for arts learning funds, what are the specific arts learning goals that we should be referencing in our application?
Oh, that is a good question. I think really those are your goals to set. Once again, like if you're doing K through 12, look at the standards, kind of look at where what their goals are. And if you want to include some of those in there, that's great. But I think it really depends on what your programming is and kind of what you want your students to get out of that. So I think those are goals that you can really set for yourself, but definitely double check, the standards or check other people's, arts learning and see what their goals are. The other thing that I should mention, which I haven't, but if you go to the community support grant page, there is last year's grant panel book on there, which is a great resource for you because you can actually look through other grants and see, kind of what maybe they used for their arts learning goals. So that's a great resource for you. You can also see the panelist comments there. So you can kind of base like, oh, this is what the panel mentioned last year that they didn't see a lot that they would like to see more of. So that's also a great resource for you. Hey, look at that. As I was talking. Thank you, Rachel. Does that help with the arts learning goals? Is there anything you would add with that, Rachel?
No, I don't think so. It really does kind of connect back to some of those other questions in the application about community and artists involved. Because when you're working with other people in your community and they're helping you set those arts learning goals, that really communicates clearly to the panel that it's not just, you and your staff sitting in a room saying, hey, we want to do this cool thing, that you're really getting the input from your community to address what they want to see. And then that you're working with qualified people who can kind of set you up on that path for meeting those goals.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions that have come up? Is there anything else in the chat?
Nope, nothing else in the chat. I just dropped the link in there to the CSG page. So fiscal year 23 information is in there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, then with that, if we don't have any other questions, here is my contact information specifically if you want to talk about content for your application. Oh, Denise, all right. What do you got?
I'm sorry to come in a bit tardy. There is a situation where a board member is spending quite a bit of time educating within a commercial setting. Is that a it's not a classroom setting, it's a commercial setting where art happens, and there is occasional free specific education going on where someone, a member of the public, is learning and is taught by a board member.
Okay.
It is one-on-one, advertised and invited.
Okay.
Is that something that would qualify?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're following those the arts learning, as long as you're an eligible organization, if you need support for that board member to teach the arts, I think, yeah, you could definitely apply for arts learning for that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Any other questions? Once again, feel free to reach out to me and we can do a one-on-one and talk specifically about your projects, or, if arts learning stuff, I'm happy to meet with you at any time. So here's my contact information. But once again, feel free to reach out to Kashmir if you need help with Foundant. Josh, if you're looking for any of the ADA stuff, he's great. And then Rachel, of course, is always a great resource. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to support you through this process. Once again, you have until April 14th to get your application in at 11:59 p.m. The other thing that I should mention is that Kashmir and I, if we are not available after 5 p.m., which we won't be, but we will be going back through and double checking the applications that did come in. So we'll be checking those on Monday. And if we see anything that's weird, we'll give you a call on Monday. So just as you know, we still will do those staff reviews, even though you turned it in on the 14th. Kashmir just dropped her contact information in the chat, so feel free to get it. You can also get it on the website on the contact. And yes, as there was a question that came up about where can you find the recordings of these workshops if you want to come back through, they will be on our YouTube page. So feel free to go and watch as many times as you want. Yeah. Thank you for coming, Jennifer. Thank you all. If we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and end. But thank you for being here, and we hope it was helpful. We look forward to seeing your applications. So thanks. Goodbye, everybody.